Hello, welcome. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. You're listening to Conversation at the Cutting Edge. Hello, Jim.
Hey, Sandy, it's nice to be here with you as always.
Good to have you back, Jim. Well, we know that the majority of people here in the USA have been very focused this past 2 weeks on the election and on Hurricane Sandy. And I also know that you have a different perspective on what we've been seeing in our outer landscape this past month and the way that people have been reacting to the events around us. So tell us from your point of view, what's going on?
Well, it's getting very interesting. The shift is, as we've said over the last year, moving very rapidly. In these last 2 months of this year, it is accelerating. But that's not necessarily obvious to people because we get wrapped up in our own day-to-day things. So let's take these two events, this Hurricane Sandy that's just occurred and this election, and let me see if I can kind of craft an understanding of what is happening in this shift and how the shift is being moved by this consideration, this concept. You have an election coming up, and this election is made up of a lot of people's opinions in terms of good and bad and right and wrong and black and white. This aspect of this election has been enormously polarized, lots of emotion tied up in it, lots of false information tied up in it, lots of false perception made up in it, and lots of accusations made up in it, blamed. So let me take this hurricane and see if I can make some sense of it. As we move forward, there is a body of thought that gets elevated by emotions. For example, if you and I were to sit and have a conversation and we had a different point of view, a number of things could occur. We could kind of take a breath and step back and observe each other a little bit more and try to come at it to figure it out. Or I could just dig my heels in and accuse you of something absurd, and you could become very reactionary. And then you can go get your group of people who want to now yell at my group of people, and the emotion gets charged, and the thought and the electrical emotion, magnetics, all become very wound up. So take this storm, for example. There was a hurricane, an independent action that is a function of the warming of the earth and the warming of those waters. And it began to churn. And because the waters were so warm, it began to take on a very large life of itself, a 1,000-mile span hurricane. Simultaneously, another high-pressure zone and another very significant winter storm is moving into the northwest. And these two storms are beginning to approach themselves, each with their own very strong sense of themselves. But there was another factor in here, and let's call it emotion. It's this factor called these northeasterner storms, a third storm, blowing down from the northeast, down from the Arctic. Typically when a hurricane or an Atlantic storm starts to move in the ocean, it's moving in the ocean, wanting to stay in the ocean. It doesn't necessarily want to come on land. But in this case, it moves in the ocean, and those northeasterner storms are cold and tremendous sheer winds, and they usually destroy that storm, that hurricane. But in this case, because the hurricane had swollen up, expanded itself in such a large proportion, those northeasterner winds pushed rather than destroyed that storm. And it pushed it into this perfect collision in the northeast where it occurred. And so you had a very warm storm with lots of movement in it, colliding with another very cold storm with lots of movement in it, and you had a result. And the result was damaging in a lot of ways. If you take that same concept and understand that when emotions, just like me and you sitting at the table, begin to get wound up, and the thought that we started out with, that if we were rational, we probably could have worked around. But because you accused me and I accused you, and we puffed up our chests and we went and gathered our troops, we created this huge energy center that was being fueled by these emotions. And just like in the election, basically the conclusion in the election, instead of something very damaging like the storm in result, is you had somebody elected. And now, as you look at the election, people backing down, and they're starting to say, well, we could have done this differently, and this wasn't very useful. And there's now beginning to be some sense, logic, some semblance of rationality working into it. So these emotion magnetics and these huge thoughts and electrics that begin to get wound up to the point where they are not manageable is a function of how people think and hold emotions. As we go into this next 3-year period, particularly 5 specifically, but the 3 are the ones to pay attention to, the shift is now dropping very much into this physicalness that we experience. And it's going to unfold. Major change is going to unfold, as we've said all along. World geopolitics, world finance, global warming in terms of the Earth becoming warmer. But there is a wild card. And the wild card is, as I've said to you before, you can't take your baggage with you on this journey into these higher spiritual dimensions of consciousness. And everybody is going home. Everybody. So where the challenge is that we're going to see in these next 3 years specifically is a lot of those unconscious emotions that we each walk around with, the place where I hold on to I'm not okay, I was embarrassed, humiliated, whatever it may be, and we hold those in our unconsciousness. All of that energy is beginning to peel off. And if you get 6 people in a room that are all peeling off their not okayness, that conflict begins to be almost inevitable. Anger becomes almost inevitable. But take it from 6 people to the third dimension humanity walking on the street and recognize that that third dimensional humanity is unconscious of being unconscious. It doesn't understand except it feels something's going on. It's getting agitated. And when you get the whole world peeling away those unconscious thoughts, that northeasterner storm, those erratic emotions are going to become very predominant in the world that we see in the next couple of years. So partly the way to work around that is understand this is in fact going to happen. And how do you manage yourself? How do you let those unconscious patterns leave without grabbing a hold of them? And how do you start to be able to observe the world around you without engaging with it or being pushed around with it like a huge northeasterly storm? That's what's on the table.
So, many people I think are beginning to notice that as without, so within. I read a wonderful report recently by Eric Francis, an astrologer whom I admire, who's based in New York, and he said that as he was walking around the dirty street, he was noticing all the debris, that had been there for years and years, was suddenly peeling away from the corners and being washed down the street. And that's exactly, in a sense, what's happening to us. Exactly.
But see, he can look at it from a glass half full standpoint and recognize that this is challenging, but look at the cleansing that's coming. Other people look at it from the glass half empty, and all they can see is, what a mess, how am I going to deal with this? I don't have enough money and my house is now gone. Rightfully so, but from that glass half empty standpoint, it begins to draw those emotions and those thoughts into places where those accelerating emotions are going to become very challenging to many. Just know that's about to happen because the shift is becoming physical.
So, we've talked about this over and over again in the past, and it's very easy to forget everything that you say. I remember you saying when you first started this show that all of the structures that we, so respected in our society were beginning to fall apart. And then a few months ago in England, we've had this huge, thing going on with the BBC, which was one of the pillars, of just respectability in England that has completely fallen apart because of the scandal there. And
right.
As we see these things, we forget that you warned us about these. And many people, again, they just go into that fear place. I keep asking you, what can people do? And I find myself still having to ask you each month, what can people do?
Well, I'm going to give you the same answer I give you every month, right? I mean, very nicely. What happens is all of us, everyone listening to this show are very dedicated to knowing themselves, to being spiritual, to bringing about cooperation, co-creation, beauty, and well-being, a fifth dimensional consciousness. But are you clearing out the unconscious stuck patterns that you walk around with? And my observation generally is, well, yes, but no. Some, but not really. And so the key to it is, from my point of view, is how do you begin to build platforms of consciousness that you can stand upon as a raft in the flooding waters, in a way, and basically be safe and certain and capable, begin to integrate those kind of energies, and begin to create a different set of choices that are available to you. These levels of fear and survival are so ingrained in each one of us. It's part of the humanness that we've experienced over the last 100,000 years. That's what's being stripped away from you. And so to grab a hold of it and argue for my lesser, my lack, my fearful, what if happens to me, glass half empty, is only simply drawing to you more of that magnetic relationship to that unconscious third dimensional world out there that is going to be very, very noisy and erratic. So if you can disengage from much of that, clear these patterns that you hold, very simple tools available, and begin to observe the world from well-being, the glass half full, the dust and the debris being washed away from the corners rather than, oh my God, what am I going to do? There is an ability to begin to create a unity of consciousness of well-being that all will start to subscribe to sometime in the future, and you begin to set it in motion. But if you can do that, the ability to walk through the seams of this next 5 years, and very specifically the next 3, is going to be far more of choice and observation than in reaction and fear. And you're going to ask me this question again next month, and the first month of January, and the 6th month of 2013.
Yes,
I'm going to give you the same, and I'll give you the same answer every time. It's not that people aren't getting it. It's that unconscious habit and belief system and fear-driven base that just keeps drawing us back into, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I'll say as clearly as I can, all of you who are listening, you are big, you are important, you are significant, you count. You are the ones that are being asked to hold this light that you know you came here to hold, but you can't do it in fear and lack. It doesn't light. It doesn't happen. And you're the ones who are the leaders. You came first and said, I'll wake up and draw the rest through this opening. So it's so important to know yourself.
I think there's something else that's really important to remind people, Jim, because I'm hearing from a lot of people that I mix with who are aware of what's going on, but who also feel that because they're aware, they've got to put themselves aside and help everybody else. When in fact what you're saying is help yourself and be the example that will help others. Is that correct?
It's more than correct. It's not a matter of giving up helping others or giving up yourself. The healer, heal thyself. So if you can't hold well-being and certain and capable and graciousness as a light that draws others, how do you heal others? How do you assist others? Because they can't see you when you're giving yourself up. It is very important to help others, but when you can't be whole yourself, your help is very minimally experienced. And many times it's not even help. It just is in a regurgitation of what they're trying to work through and you're trying to work through. And it becomes kind of the mouse on the wheel and talking about how good it's going to be and how bad it is to each other, but running on the same wheel. There is a place where each of us has to make a very definitive statement that I wish to know myself. In that, knowing yourself is what becomes this light that draws all these others to you and begins to give them a sense of capacity in themselves. If you can do it, I can do it, they begin to say. But many times to do that, you have to let go of the ones you're trying to heal because they're just pulling you back into the same spinning wheel. You have to step out of the problem, out of the relationship, out of the situation sometimes to heal yourself, to then be able to go back into it and uplift and nurture. I'm saying it as simply as I can say it, and maybe not elegantly as I could say it, but I'm mostly interested in the few minutes we have to make this message very clear. These next 3 years are going to be filled with choices. How do you choose?
How do you choose? That comes up again and again and again, and of course we have to be reminded of it. So I'm going to keep asking the questions, and I know you're going to keep giving the same answer each month, and that's exactly as it should be.